Hey everyone, and welcome back. So today we're going to be reviewing MARSUPILAMI HOOBADVENTURE for the Nintendo Switch. Now if we start with the basics, many would call this a 2.5D platformer, very reminiscent of what we see in the Donkey Kong Country series. The game was released on November 16th of 2021, and it sells on the Nintendo Switch eShop and physically for $29.99. Now this game has been published by Microids, and it has a download size of 2.8 gigabytes. Now the question for today, is MARSUPILAMI going to be able to swing himself to platformer fame? Well, let's find out. Now don't forget as you're watching the video that if you do like the content, to consider hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. So now, if we start with the storyline. For me, I know the MARSUPILAMI characters from the early 90s Disney series that was on television. But before and after, they've been featured in multiple comic strips. They are characters with extremely long tails that they can manipulate into different shapes to help them move around the environment or to even use them as different tools. Now to set up the plot at the beginning of the game, you get a very brief cutscene where you see the three different animals basically exploring a sarcophagus. Unfortunately, unknown to them, they liberate a ghost that places a curse on all the animals within the different areas. All the animals, that is, except our MARSUPILAMIs that are luckily immune to the curse. So from there on, our heroes are tasked with chasing down the ghost to break the terrible curse. Now, although this is a very basic setup, and honestly the storyline won't evolve till probably the final cutscene, it wasn't something I missed here because this is a game that is really focused around the platforming and gameplay, so you aren't really missing out on the lack of storyline. Now, if we jump straight into that gameplay. First of all, you have a selection of three different MARSUPILAMI, which are Punch, Twister, and Hope. Unfortunately, other than being different skins for the MARSUPILAMI, there's actually no difference in abilities or movement for any of the characters. So although it was nice that they did include three different skins so that you can take whichever appeals to you more, it would have been nice to have slight differences in the different abilities of the MARSUPILAMI. Now the main game is split up into 22 different levels with 6 bonus levels available and unlockable depending on how many collectibles you can get to. And there are actually 3 different difficulty levels, one actually making your character invincible. And on this level, he can only die if he falls into a pit. After that, you have the normal level that basically gives you 3 hearts, and you have the hard level that gives you only 2 hearts. The only thing I will say here is that if you are very experienced with 2D platformers, you will find that the challenge level here, even on the hard setting, is very, very low. And although the level designs and even the graphical presentation does reminisce a lot to the Donkey Kong Country series, it never quite gets to that level of challenge. What is very fun, however, in this game is that you do have multiple collectibles. First, you have these multicolored feathers, which most levels have 5. And I would recommend trying to pick up as many as you can early on, because if you want to experience all the bonus levels, especially the last one, which I would say is a highlight of the game, you are going to need most of the feathers from the levels. Also, each level has a hidden door that leads to a bonus level, once again very recognizable from Donkey Kong Country. Now, completing these bonus challenges will award you tickets that are once again required for unlocking certain of the bonus levels. Now, overall, completing the complete game in my case, including all the bonus levels, only took me about 3.5 hours. But then again, I do consider myself pretty experienced with the 2D platformer genre. If you're giving this to a kid or someone that is less experienced, obviously you could probably add in a couple of hours. It's also important to note that for a completionist going for 100% of the collectibles, a replay of most levels will be required. And upon completing the level once, it also unlocks the time trial challenge, which can be a huge undertaking for someone who would want 100% completion at the gold level. I did challenge myself to a couple of time trials, and although the base game is very easy, if you do challenge yourself to the time trials and you want the top reward, it is very difficult. One last tiny comment on the general gameplay is that I would have really preferred this game to have maybe an extra world with a slightly higher difficulty level, because although they're targeting a base audience, you can see that this game has a ton of potential, especially if you unlock that last bonus level where the difficulty is almost 5-fold the rest of the game. It's almost as if the developers wanted to prove to themselves that using the exact same mechanics and challenges, they could actually make the levels very difficult. And personally, it ended up being my favorite level of the whole game. So to me, this is a game that is screaming out to have an extra world tacked onto it with a higher difficulty level. So now if we move on to the controls. Now first of all, you have the choice between using either the D-pad or the left joystick for the movement of the character, something I always appreciate a ton for 2D platformers. After that, you only have 3 different action buttons. First, you have B for your jump. After that, you have Y, which has a double function of actually activating your roll mechanic, or when you're near an object that can be interacted with as an action button. And lastly, you have the ZR trigger that when you're in the air will initiate a ground stomp. Overall, even though the control schematic is very simple, it was one of the main highlights of the game for me, because movement throughout the game is extremely pleasant. And the way you can combo the different movements between jumping on an enemy's head, grabbing onto an activatable item, initiating a ground stomp, and doing a wall bounce is actually really amazing. And except for a handful of occasions where the frame rate did stutter, the controls are generally extremely responsive. And although you'll experience a lot of these different movement techniques in the base game depending on how you approach the playthrough, I would say that the amazing fluidity of the movement system will be really experienced by someone who decides to undertake the time trials. And coming back to my earlier point, even though the time trials are a significant challenge, I would have really preferred the game instead to have an extra zone where it really ramped up the challenge on the base levels, really pushing you to experience that beautiful movement system. Now we get to the graphics and sound. And without a doubt, the animations and the graphics here, the production value is very high. It doesn't quite make it to Donkey Kong Country territory, but it is a very close second. They also went for an overall cartoony aesthetic that matches perfectly with the different characters, so I really love the approach they took here. The only slightly disappointing thing I have to say from the graphical performance in the game, and I did point to it earlier, is that there are some slight moments of stuttering where the frame rate drops a bit. You can see the game here is targeting 60 frames per second, but at different moments, unfortunately, it just doesn't quite make it. And although you can notice these frame rate drops if you're looking for them from time to time, I've got to say that overall, however, it didn't negatively affect my gameplay. However, as I mentioned earlier, let's not forget that I did not find this platformer challenging as well, so perhaps were the elements a slightly higher challenge level, maybe some of these frame rate drops could have actually affected the gameplay. But to close out this point, I've got to say that the frame rate drops are not jarring in my opinion, and the game remains nonetheless a graphically appealing experience. Sound-wise, once again, I think this game hits a pretty decent home run, with a soundtrack that is perfectly fitting to the action. They evoke very much a jungle thematic, and they really help highlight the action. Especially when the game switches to some of the chase sequences, the soundtrack really highlights the fact that this is a more intense moment. I have to say that both graphically and sound-wise, this is a very appealing package. And I do have my fingers crossed that after a couple of patches, even the slight frame rate drops can be smoothed out. Now it's time for the verdict, and if this is the first time watching one of my videos, just to let you know, my full grading scale is available down below in the description of the video. And today I'm going to be giving MARSUPILAMI HOOBADVENTURE on the Nintendo Switch a 6.5, putting it on the high end of an okay game. Now I do want to mention that this score is based on a straight playthrough. For someone who is going to go completionist on this game and specially undertake the time trials, I could easily see an extra point being added. And another important point contributing to this score is the $30 price point, because although the production values are high, at only about a 3.5 hour playtime for someone who's used to 2D platformers, the value proposition is a little low. However, once this game goes on sale to under a $20 price point, you can once again probably add an extra point to the score. Because at $15 to $20 for the overall production value and potential of this game, then it becomes an extremely interesting proposition. And as a final notice, if ever the developer does come across this video, I would love some DLC adding in an extra world, as I said earlier, with a higher challenge level, sort of comparable to what we got from your last bonus level. Heck, give me that, and this game could almost be scoring an 8. So now I throw the question back to all of you. Are you going to be picking up MARSUPILAMI on the Nintendo Switch? Let me know in the comments down below. And don't forget on the way out that if you did like what you saw, to consider hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel if you aren't already, and hitting that notification bell so you know when all my future content comes out. And as usual, I'll see you in my next video.